This is Rich Walkus coming to you for Flood Talk from H2O Partners USA. Here today to talk to you about a very fundamental topic, the NFIP's definition of the general condition of flood. In other words, how does the National Flood Insurance Program define a flood, and by that, what does it take to trigger our coverage? For the definition of a flood, let's go to Section 2 of the dwelling policy, the definitions section. And by the way, flood is defined the same way with the exact same wording in all three policy forms. Now, this definition is so important, I'm going to first read this definition, and then I'm going to go back and explain its key criteria. A flood is a general and temporary condition of partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres of normally dry land area or 2 or more properties from the overflow of inland or tidal waters, or from the unusual and rapid accumulation of runoff of surface waters from any source, and from mud flow. Whew, that's a mouthful. Well, let's go back and break down that definition into its key criteria. First of all, the condition of flooding must be general.
10 hut!
No, not that kind of general. As I was saying, flooding must be general. It must be at a minimum affect 2 or more properties. In other words, that surface water must cross a property line. Or, if confined to one property under a single individual ownership, it would have to cover at least 2 or more acres. The 2-acre rule is self-explanatory, but 2 or more properties can be explained as floodwaters that affect property the insured owns, as well as property he does not own. For example, unless he's a member of Congress, the property owner does not own the street in front of his house. Now, let's say a water main breaks and water rolls down the street and jumps that curb into the cul-de-sac and floods poor Sonia's basement. Well, that surface water has crossed a property line, so it would be considered a flood by the National Flood Insurance Program. Secondly, a flood must be a temporary condition. It must have a definitive starting point and a definitive stopping point. Third, inundation must be present. 3 types of inundation are described in the definition. The first type is overflow of inland or tidal waters. And this is what most people think when they think of a flood. You know, when a river overflows or a lake spills over its banks and floods. The overflow of tidal waters. Now, here we're talking about our coastal areas. You know, oceans and bays where water spills over and floods the surrounding terrain. The second type of inundation the definition talks about is the unusual and rapid accumulation from surface waters from any source. Note the 2 key phrases, surface floodwaters. It must, I repeat, it must travel across the surface of the ground to be considered a flood. And the other key phrase, surface waters from any source. And those surface waters can literally come from anywhere, like the example of the water main break. Finally, a flood must be accidental from the insured standpoint. Nobody flooding their own basement with a garden hose will get paid. Now, the third type of inundation the NFIP policy covers is mud flow. Later in the definition section of the policy, the NFIP defines mud flow as a river of liquid and flowing mud on the surfaces of normally dry land areas, as when earth is carried by a current of water. So a mud flow is more water than dirt, kind of like chocolate milk, or a bit grainy like Ovaltine. And what a mess to clean up. All the damage that water can cause, plus the extreme filth of mud. We cover mud flow, but the definition of mud flow goes on to talk about types of earth movement we do not cover, such as earthquake, landslide, land subsidence, sinkholes, gradual erosion. And we don't cover destabilization or movement of land that results from accumulation of water in the subsurface land area. This type of destabilization of land happens a lot in California. First, you get the wildfires over those hills. They burn off the vegetation that helps to hold the land together and absorbs the rainwater. That water sinks down through the earth and finds a layer of sand or gravel, and then the water acts as a lubricant and loosens that heavy water-saturated hill till gravity takes over, and down it comes. Sorry, but flood insurance doesn't cover it. Now, the second part of the definition states that the collapse or subsidence of land along the shore of a lake or similar body of water as a result of erosion or undermining caused by waves or currents of water exceeding anticipated cyclical levels that result in a flood as defined above. Whew, that's a mouthful. What that translates to is that erosion caused by a flood is covered. Gradual erosion, erosion caused over time, is not covered. Let's go to an example. This house was on a man-made lake in Wisconsin. Spring came and the snow melted, and on top of that, sudden heavy rains happened. Its man-made dam burst, sending water rushing out into the Wisconsin River. This current of water exceeded its anticipated levels and caused this collapse of land and caused the house to fall into the water and caused this flood. This damage would be covered under the standard flood insurance policy. Well, that's all the time I have for the NFIP's definition of a flood. Hope you enjoyed our little talk. This is Rich Walker saying so long for Flood Talk from H2O Partners USA.